Hey there! There's a very high chance you do not know me, and that's because I am usually holed up in a whole different platform called Twitch. Because I don't know if we can... But my name is Jin Foxy, and you can call me Jin, you can call me Jinny, you can call me Poopy, you can call me really whatever you want. And this is a channel where I talk about absolutely everything and anything that I want to talk about. So yeah, welcome to my channel, Jin Talks About Things. For now though, I will be primarily talking about books since it's my favorite hobby. I used to read a lot of books from the age of 10, which is when I discovered Twilight, roughly, all the way until I was in high school. However, I eventually stopped reading books and I shifted to spending most of my time on gay fanfiction. From around the age of 15 until just 2 years ago when I was around like 25 or 26, I only managed to read 5 books in total, which is kind of sad, not gonna lie. Like when I was reading fanfiction, I always kept thinking about how much I missed going to a bookstore and browsing through books and finding one that piqued my interest enough to read it and actually finish it. I was in this very weird limbo type of situation because I didn't know what I wanted to read. I felt too old to be reading books like Divergent or The Maze Runner, but too young to be reading the nonfiction historical novels that my mom was reading at the time. Things were either too boring, too repetitive, or just not creative enough to interest me fully. And I started to think that maybe books were just something that I was never really gonna feel that sort of spark for. Fast forward to 2023, I had a dream. I wanted to read at least 1 book a month, making it a total of 12 books in the whole year of 2023. It seemed obtainable, you know, as I used to read a lot more than that when I was in middle school. Sometimes I would read like 2 books a week. Sometimes I would read 3. If I was like really into the books that I was reading, I would read entire series that were not good, but I still like binge read them. So 1 book a month was definitely possible in my head. And I ended up reading 2.5 books that year. However, the bright side of this is that I discovered that I could find books that piqued my interest. You know, 2.5 books in a year was already an upgrade from 0 books in over 10 years. I, however, will admit that most of my recommendations do come from TikTok. The dreaded and aforementioned booktok. But I am kind of part of it, and I do find some really good recommendations over there. I think it's an amazing way to find new books from all over the place. I did like a whole full circle thing where I became obsessed with vampires again. And it's very cool that I can just type like vampire books and into that little TikTok search bar thing and find a bunch of new books that I haven't even heard of or knew that existed, and hear the reviews of multiple people and sort of like decide based on those videos if I want to take the risk of reading them or not. With all of that backstory out of the way, here I am, freshly out of 2024 with a broken ankle, but also with the incredible news that I was able to read 16 books in total. I didn't read a book every month, as there were some months where I wasn't motivated enough to read and I didn't want to pick up a book, but I still found a way to read 16 books in the entirety of the year, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about them. I will be having more in-depth reviews of all the books that I read in 2024 in the future, so for now, I will just be talking briefly about them and sort of like giving it my overall rating. So yeah, we're gonna start with the first book that I read this year, which was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think it was because of this book that I was able to start the year incredibly optimistic about my reading goal, because I genuinely loved it so much. I had heard so much buzz around it for a little over a year and decided that I really wanted to give it a try. I was also sort of convinced because my job was doing like a book club thing that we only did once, and it was this book. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll read it. I was recently asked to describe the plot of this book without giving any spoilers, and the best way that I could sort of like come up with a description was a glamorous and scandalous gossipy fictional drama based on the golden age of Hollywood about love and identity. I had initially given this book a 4-star rating, but after sitting almost an entire year with it, I just continued rethinking about it, and I kept revisiting it, and I kept talking about it to my friends and recommending it to my friends, that I decided that if it's so present in my life, maybe it actually deserves a 5-star rating. So yeah. Next book that I read was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Now, the ACOTAR series is a very controversial series for many people, and I will discuss that more in depth in the future when I finish reading the complete series and review it as a whole in a future video. For now though, A Court of Mist and Fury was an incredibly fun and exciting book to read despite my initial feelings about ACOTAR, which is the first book in the series. ACOMAF is the second book in this ongoing saga because I think there's more books that are supposed to be coming out soon. And I personally really enjoyed it. It has enough amounts of fantasy and action and romance that I think it can be very entertaining for people that are looking to get introduced into the romantasy genre, as TikTok has called it. So yeah, I think it's a very beginner-friendly universe for adults you can get into. I had originally rated this book a 4 stars out of 5, but after thinking about it and sitting on it for an entire year as well, I have decided to up its rating into 5 stars, and I will talk more in depth about it when I do the series review on ACOTAR. The next book I read was Kim Jiyoung, Born in 1982 by Cho Namju. I had heard so much about this book from multiple feminist groups that I am part of, and I decided to give it a try. This book is very different from everything else that I read in this year, and it's all about feminism from a South Korean perspective. It's incredibly informative, eye-opening, and at times infuriating to read due to what the author narrates as like the average experience for a Korean woman. If you're interested in feminism or are looking for a quick book that can help you learn about feminism or the feminist movement across the world, I would highly recommend reading this book. I gave it a 5 stars solely on how much of an interesting read it was. And I think if you are very interested in intersectional feminism and just overall learning more about women's rights and the fight for equality in multiple parts of the world, this is such a quick book. The next book I read is Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. I will go more in depth on the Captive Prince trilogy. So these reviews are meant to be very quick and to the point, and I have a lot to say about this trilogy as a whole. This is my best friend's trilogy, and I've heard her talk about it for such a long time. So I decided to finally read it. I do have to say, the Captive Prince trilogy is a BL/MLM, depends how you want to categorize it, but it's about 2 men having feelings for one another, fighting each other, falling in love with each other, and doing all of that tango with each other. So if you're not interested in reading a male romance, then I don't think the Captive Prince trilogy is for you. Captive Prince is the first book in this trilogy, and in broader terms, this story narrates the life of 2 heirs to a kingdom that are at war, and somehow they end up coexisting, to put it kindly. Despite how much people love this book, I had such a hard time finishing it, and it was a bummer because I wanted to love it so much, but I just couldn't. I ended up giving it a 2-star rating out of 5. After that, I started reading the second book in the trilogy, which is Princess Gambit by C.S. Pacat as well. This is when things actually started to pick up for me and it became super interesting and exciting to read. I like to think that Captive Prince was just like the setup for the second and third book to truly shine. I enjoyed Princess Gambit so much because it had more elements of romance and character exploration that I feel were lacking on the first part of the series. I tend to prefer stories where we can fully learn about the characters and really see them for who they are, and Princess Gambit did that with our 2 main guys, and I absolutely loved it. I gave this book a 5-star rating. After that, I read the last book of the trilogy, which is King's Rising by C.S. Pacat as well. This book was amazing, to say the least. Like I said before, here the story truly and finally picked up in a more intense and stressful way. This was the climax of the entire series, and whatever happened in this book could not be undone. So I was on the edge of my seat trying to devour this book in one afternoon because I wanted to know how the story ended. I had already developed a sort of feeling or connection with the characters with her two main protagonists, and I love them both. So the tensions were very, very high, and I ended up giving up this book a 5-star rating as well, because I loved it so much. It took my breath away. It was so good. Then I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I was convinced to buy this book super early because I stumbled across a TikTok that talked about how it was the new romance book between a vampire and a werewolf. And like I said earlier in the video, I am a sucker for some good old vampire romance. So yeah, sue me. I like vampires, whatever. I, however, despite the excitement of a big crowd on TikTok, ended up giving this book a 1.2-star rating out of 5. It was an incredibly easy read, and I think a lot of people can enjoy it. I just don't think it was for me, but I will explain why in a future video. That had been my first Ali Hazelwood book, but one of my best friends really loves her books and she recommended me to try Love Theoretically next. After reading so much fantasy, I wanted to try some non-fantasy romance, so I decided to follow her recommendation. She specifically said to me, I think you're gonna love this one. And she was right. I gave this book a 5-star rating because it's a good old romance between two adults, but you actually get to learn about the characters in a way that made their whole falling in love feel like an absolute win. I'd say this book is one of the few books that I read this year that truly felt like it fit the enemies to lovers trope. And yeah, it was a 5-star for me. I loved it. I genuinely loved it. It was so fun to read. Next, I read Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is a book that was gifted to me by my cousin, who's like my sister, because she saw that TikTok was recommending it as the new vampire fantasy enemies to lover romance book of the year. And I am a sucker for all of those 4 categories. So she gifted it to me. I read it and I didn't click with it. I ended up giving this book a 2-star rating out of 5 because the ending was actually really good. I think it would have been a lot lower if the ending had been bad, but the ending was good and it was good enough that it made me want to give the sequel a chance. Because I think there's more books in this universe. I don't know if it's 2 or 3 more. So I was like, okay, maybe the second book is where it gets better and it picks up and it becomes interesting to me. So yeah, I ended up giving it a 2-star rating. Then I read The Ever King by LJ Andrews, and I don't really have a lot to say about this book. I gave it a 2-star rating, but I feel like I was being a little generous with it. I do know there's more books in this series as well, and maybe it's one of those series where you have to read the second book to like really get hooked on it. But yeah, I chose this book because I was looking for like a pirate romance story because I wanted pirate fantasy romance. This really does have pirate fantasy romance on it, but it wasn't really good for me. I did not enjoy it personally, but I will go more in depth as to why it wasn't in a future video. Speaking of pirates though, the next book I read was The Other Miss Bridgerton by Julia Quinn, and this is that romance pirate book that I was looking for in The Ever King, but I didn't get. I hadn't read any Bridgerton books before. I'm a pure Netflix show girly, but I was at a store and they had this book for like $3, so I was like, well, if it sucks, I paid $3 for it, so whatever. And to my surprise, it didn't suck. I actually really liked it. I loved it. I gave this book a 4-star rating out of 5 because not only was it super quick and simple to read, but the characters were very enjoyable. The romance was fun and it felt very organic. And the dynamic between the main character and her love interest felt so organic. I don't know, it made sense. I don't know, I liked it. I really liked it. The next book I read was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This was my first mystery thriller book ever. It came as a suggestion from my Twitch community's book club. We have a book club if you're a part of my Twitch community, so you can join our Discord if you want to like participate. I do want to bring it back and maybe read more fun, interesting, cool books throughout the year. So yeah, we have that going on. Besides being the first time that I read this genre, it was also my first time being part of a book club, which made this experience like so much more enjoyable and exciting. I gave this book a 4 stars out of 5, and I think it's a pretty solid mystery thriller read. I am not the most well-versed in this genre, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting and very stressful, but in a good way. The next book I read was Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. This I also picked up because of TikTok and how much BookTok was obsessing over this story to the point that it became national news, and hockey teams had to like make PSAs about not being weird, and schools were like, don't buy this book, don't be fooled by the cover, like it's not for your teenage daughter and shit like that. However, I ended up giving it a 0.2 stars out of 5. It was not for me. It wasn't enjoyable for me at all. And I don't think I can recommend it personally, but I don't know, I guess it depends on what you like to read. Next was The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This was my read for the month of October because I wanted something spooky and witchy. And personally, I am a big fan of Alexis' writing style, so I knew it was going to be perfect for Spooktober. And it was. I loved it. I loved it so much. She has such an incredible way of writing that it's so immersive and it's so gothic and spooky. I loved it. I don't know. I gave this book a 4.5 star rating out of 5. I just think it was an amazing read, honestly. The next book I read was Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. This book also came to me through TikTok. A creator had described it as Danny Phantom meets Asterion from Baldur's Gate 3, and I was hooked, and so I got it and I read it. I decided to read it during October because I figured it was like spooky and like had ghosts and, you know, like supernatural stuff, so it kind of fit the October aesthetic. I ended up giving it a 2.5 star out of 5. It has its fair amount of romance and action and fantasy, but I guess I was imagining something completely different when I picked it up. I know there's a second book being released at some time during 2025, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe I'll give it a try and see if I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the first book. So we'll see. I don't know. Last but not least, the last book I read this year was A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. I was in my Greek gods era and I was looking for some books that could itch that need, and I found some people recommending it online. It was actually not BookTok this time. It was Fable. So I decided to give it a try. It's a modern AU fantasy retelling of the Hades and Persephone romance, and I found it very enjoyable and interesting, to say the least. I personally really liked it. I gave this book a 4.2 stars out of 5. It was a super fast, simple, and quick read, but it delivered the right amount of romance and drama and fantasy. So I think it's just very enjoyable. If you enjoy Greek retellings, I think, and you really like romance as well, I think this book is for you. I know there's more books in the series, so I will probably read them and then come back with a series update video, maybe? Eye emoji. And yeah, that's a wrap for my 2024 reading recap. I'm honestly very happy I was able to read as many books as I did this entire year of 2024. I am hoping to achieve the same or maybe a little bit more in this coming year of 2025. So yeah, thank you so much for coming along in my recap journey. I will be doing more in-depth reviews of the books that I read throughout the year. So if there's a book that you're waiting to hear my thoughts on, make sure you subscribe to not miss an upload. What about you guys? Did you read any books this year? If yes, which ones were your favorite? And which books are you excited to read in 2025? Thank you so much for watching this far, and I hope you all have a very lovely start of 2025. Take lots of care. You can find me on Twitch if you want, but if not, I'll be here pretty soon with a 2025 TBR video of all the books that I want to read during 2025. So yeah, thank you for watching. Bye!